In December 2020, a woman named Lee Ji-young opened a YouTube live stream to celebrate hitting 140,000 subscribers. Her fans, mostly high school students, flooded the chat with one question: how much money do you actually make? She pulled up her primary bank account on screen. The balance read 13 billion won, roughly $10 million. And she clarified that number excluded her real estate, her stock portfolio, and her overseas funds. Lee Ji-young is not a K-pop star. She's not a tech founder. She teaches society and ethics at a private tutoring company. And she is part of a breed of celebrity that exists in almost no other country on earth. They're called Ilta Gangsa. Il from the Korean word for number one, ta from star. These are tutors who have amassed massive fortunes and genuine fandom for helping students pass exams. Lee Ji-young owns more than 10 cars, including a Lamborghini Aventador S, a Ferrari 458, a McLaren 650S, and a Porsche 911. Her annual salary, she says, hasn't fallen below the 10 billion won level since 2014. In a country where the average household income hovers around $40,000, she earns more than most Korean CEOs, more than most K-drama leads, and more than every public school teacher in the country combined would make in a decade. And she's not an outlier. Kim Ki-hoon, an English tutor on the publicly traded platform MegaStudy, made about $4 million in a single year from online lessons alone, with another $10 million flowing through his educational publishing company. Cha Kil-young, a math tutor who runs 7EDU, teaches an average of 300,000 students at any given time, each paying $39 for his 20-hour courses. Today, I want to explain how a market this lucrative came to exist and why that should matter to you even if you've never set foot in Korea or never planned to. To understand the money, you need to understand what's being tested. Every November, on the third Thursday of the month, South Korea does something no other country does for a standardized test. The government reroutes or grounds aircraft to keep noise from distracting students. Police officers provide free escorts, sirens blaring for anyone running late. The stock market opens an hour late. Banks delay operations. Construction halts. Military training ceases. In 2025, 140 flights, including 75 international services, were rescheduled during the 35-minute English listening portion. The exam is called the Suneung. It runs for 8 to 9 hours in a single day. More than 550,000 students take it. One of the last arrival at Seoul Girls High School one year emerged from the back of an ambulance that had sped up to the school with lights flashing. She ran into the courtyard with her head down minutes before the door closed. Younger students, juniors who will sit the exam in coming years, line up outside test sites with cheering signs and chant slogans like "Get 100 score" on Suneung. Parents avoid serving seaweed soup the night before because the slippery strands are believed to cause points to slip away. Others refuse to wash their hair to avoid washing away accumulated knowledge. Parents visit temples and churches to pray, sometimes weeks in advance. There's a common Korean saying: if you sleep 3 hours a night, you may get into a Sky University. If you sleep 4, you may get into another university. Sky refers to Seoul National University, Korea University, and Yonsei University, the three schools that function as Korea's credentialing gatekeepers the way Harvard, Yale, and Princeton do in the United States. Except in Korea, the gatekeeping is tighter and the consequences of failing to pass through are even more severe. Daniel Tudor, a journalist and author, put it to NPR this way: Korea is very hierarchical. If you're seen as someone who's not succeeded, you're really made to feel second class. He added that the chaebols, Samsung, Hyundai, LG, SK, have every market worth having sewn up. If Mark Zuckerberg grew up in Korea, there's absolutely no way he'd be doing what he's doing now. He'd probably be working for Samsung and hating it. If you want to see what a fully mature exam civilization looks like at street level, go to Daechidong. It's a neighborhood in Gangnam District, Seoul, about a 10-minute walk from the COEX Convention Center. Within a 1.5-mile radius centered around Hanti subway station, there are roughly 1,600 Hagwons, private tutoring academies. That's 62% of all commercial businesses in the area. More Hagwons than convenience stores and cafes combined in a city that already seems to have a convenience store on every corner. The neighborhood became an education hub in the 1970s when the Park Chung-hee government forcibly relocated some of Seoul's most prestigious high schools from the old downtown to Gangnam. Parents followed. Real estate prices climbed to 300% of comparable areas in Seoul. The education infrastructure fed the real estate prices. The real estate prices attracted more education-focused families, and that feedback loop has now run for 5 decades. In Daechidong, parents enroll 4-year-olds in pre-kindergarten academies designed to prepare them for entrance exams to elite English language kindergartens. These kindergartens enforce strict, no Korean speaking policies, hire foreign teachers, and cost upwards of 2 million won, about $1,380 per month. Parents hire tutors, purchase exam guides reviewing past test questions, and even pay proxies to wait in line for kindergarten enrollment slots. Math academies push 3rd graders to complete the 6th grade curriculum, with some students tackling calculus by 5th grade. By senior year, the days stretch from school at 4:30 to Hagwon classes at 10 p.m. to solo study sessions past midnight. One former US resident who lived in Daegu described picking up his Korean nephew from Hagwon during the boy's senior year. Pickup time was usually around midnight. By the way, if you're finding this interesting, subscribing genuinely helps. It costs nothing and means the world to me. Back to it. So that's the ground level picture. Now, zoom out because there's a structural reason why 40 years of government intervention has failed to even put a dent in any of this. The philosopher Thomas Kuhn studied how scientific communities operate, and he noticed something that applies far beyond science. Communities don't have beliefs. They evaluate their entire reality inside of a specific framework for what counts as a valid question, what counts as acceptable evidence, and what counts as reasonable. Kuhn called these frameworks paradigms. And when you're inside one, you don't experience it as a choice. You experience it as hard reality. The paradigm tells you what to notice and what to ignore, and does this so efficiently that you forget it's doing it at all. Korea has built one of the most airtight paradigms there is. This one is organized entirely around exam performance. It defines what success looks like, SKY admission, what the path requires, exam scores, what responsible parenting means, maximizing educational investment, and what the alternative is, second-class citizenship. Every participant, students, parents, teachers, employers, the military, the stock exchange, has organized their behavior around this frame. And the frame is self-enforcing. Employers hire from SKY universities because that's where the best candidates come from. The best candidates go to SKY because that's where employers hire from. Parents invest in Hagwons because other parents invest in Hagwons, and any family that opts out is making a unilateral decision to disadvantage their child in a positional competition. Economists at the American Economic Review formalized this dynamic using a quantitative model calibrated to Korea. They found that fertility would be 28% higher without the status externality in educational spending. The trap here is saying these parents are abusive and irrational for perpetuating the vicious cycle. But in reality, they are trapped inside a coordination game where the individually rational move, spend more on tutoring, produces a result that's catastrophic for everyone, an arms race that nobody can exit because the first people who do become second-class citizens. And this frame didn't appear from nowhere. Before toothbrushes or printing presses, Chinese families were hiring test prep tutors for the Imperial Civil Service exam, a system that spread across East Asia. Korea adopted its own version during the Goryeo dynasty in the 10th century. Then they formalized it during the Joseon dynasty through the Gwaga. This was, for centuries, the primary mechanism of social mobility in a rigidly hierarchical society. Yo-Yum Shik, a professor of sociology at Yonsei University, said Koreans have long held that education is the ladder up to upward mobility. During the Joseon dynasty, it was the Gwaga. The tradition continues in the form of the Suneung. That's 1,200 years of the same core logic. A single standardized test determines who governs, who prospers, and who remains on the margins. The paradigm was installed so long ago and so deeply that most participants can no longer see it as a choice. With that in mind, it's now much easier to understand why the Korean government has been trying to dismantle the system for over 40 years and why it has failed every single time. In the 1980s, under the Chun Doo-hwan military dictatorship, the government banned all private tutoring outright. Illegal tutoring picked right back up. The nominal ban was ruled unconstitutional in 2000. In 2006, the government imposed a 10 p.m. curfew on Hagwon operating hours. In response, Seoul dispatched teams of inspectors to patrol Daechidong after hours, looking for slivers of light behind drawn shades. The time account of one such raid reads like a police procedural. Inspectors walk down the sidewalk, staring up at the floors above the Dunkin' Donuts and the Craze Burgers, following a tip-off to a shabby building. A female inspector knocked on a door. "Just a minute," came the muted reply from inside. The inspectors exchanged glances. "Just a minute" was the wrong answer. They blocked the elevator and raided the building. But the curfew didn't work. A study in the International Journal of Educational Development found that enforcing it did not generate a significant reduction in hours or resources spent on private tutoring. Hagwons moved lessons online. Others simply operated past curfew anyway. Andrew Kim, a top instructor at Megastudy, told Time, "The tougher the measures, the more resilient Hagwons become." The government tried capping tuition. Courts ruled it potentially unconstitutional. They tried simplifying the exam. The private tutoring industry adapted within months. They tried expanding public after-school programs. Parents treated them as supplements instead of substitutes. Every attempted reform targets symptoms while leaving the underlying frame untouched. As long as Sky admission determines lifetime earnings, marriage prospects, and social status, the demand for exam preparation is structurally inelastic. The government is trying to drain a lake by regulating the size of buckets. This brings us back to why Korean tutors make $10 million a year. The surface explanation that they're great teachers covers part of it, but teaching skill alone doesn't generate this amount of money. Something else is being purchased. These tutors are selling uncertainty reduction in a society where the cost of uncertainty is existential. A Korean parent will spend 25% of household income on private education, a figure confirmed by EduTech Associates, while the knowledge itself is freely available in textbooks on YouTube and in the public school curriculum. What's actually scarce is what I'd call borrowed cognition, a pre-assembled framework that tells them exactly what their child needs to focus on. It tells them what questions will appear on the test and what this moment to Sky admission actually looks like step by step. The most prized tutors in the 1970s and 80s were nicknamed tweezers for their ability to pluck out exactly the questions that would appear on exams. That massively valuable skill was sense making. The tweezers reduce an impossibly complex decision landscape, hundreds of topics, thousands of possible questions, and a single 8-hour test down to something actionable. The Ilta lecturers of today do the same thing at scale, but they've added something the tweezers never had: emotional infrastructure. Lee Ji-young is famous not just for her lectures, but for her pep talks on positivity and grit, stories about growing up poor and studying her way to success. Her fans post comments saying they cried, that she supported them through the hardest years of their lives. She is, functionally, a therapist, a life coach, and a test prep Oracle rolled into a single parasocial relationship that 3.5 million teenagers plug into. Cha Kil-young, the math tutor, told the Washington Post that as a teacher, you're not only teaching a subject, you also have to be a multi-talented entertainer. He uses bunny hats and Batman masks during lectures. He recruits K-pop stars to cheer on students before the Suneung. The top Hagwon platforms function less like tutoring services and more like talent agencies crossed with streaming platforms where instructors are free agents paid on pure performance, how many students sign up, how those students score, and how they rate the teacher afterward. Each year, roughly 10% of instructors at a representative Hagwon get fired for poor performance. In the US, about 2% of public school teachers are dismissed annually. This $20 billion private education industry is so lucrative that Megastudy, the platform where Kim Ki-hoon works, is listed on the South Korean Stock Exchange, and the sector has drawn investment from Goldman Sachs and the Carlyle Group. The tutors, who make $10 million, figured out that the lecture is the delivery mechanism. The actual product is a portable frame that makes an unbearable situation feel survivable. And now, the cost. In 2024, Korean families spent a record 29.2 trillion won, 20.1 billion, on private after-school education. That figure has broken records for 4 consecutive years, even as the student population declines. Korea has the highest child-rearing costs in the world, accounting to 7.79 times its per capita GDP. For comparison, China is second at 6.9 times. Germany drops by nearly half. For the lowest income families with children aged 13 to 18, the monthly average spent on Hagwons and private education was 482,000 won, about $319. That's slightly higher than what those same families spend on food. And the demographic consequence is now visible from space. South Korea's total fertility dropped to 0.78 in 2022, the lowest of any country in the world. The government has spent more than $270 billion since 2006 trying to reverse the decline. It has failed. A recent study found that a 1% increase in private education spending is associated with a 0.3 decrease in total fertility rate. In March 2026, an elementary school in Seoul's Gangsa-gu district called Dongmung Elementary, in operations in 1995, recorded 0 incoming first graders. The empty first grade classroom is being converted into a cafeteria. Young Korean couples don't just say children are too expensive. They instead say something much more specific. I don't want to raise a child if I can't give them everything they need. And everything they need means 18 years of competitive educational spending that can run into hundreds of thousands of dollars per child. The exam paradigm has become so load-bearing that it is, by observable metrics, ending the society that built it. Korean parents have internalized the frame so completely that they would rather not reproduce than reproduce a child they can't fully equip for the credentialing arms race. Amanda Ripley, writing in the Wall Street Journal, said one of these star tutors, "An American with his ambition and abilities might have to become a banker or a lawyer, but in South Korea, he had become a teacher and he was rich anyway." She meant it as a compliment, but I read it as a diagnosis. In a society that funnels all ambition through a single credentialing gate, the gatekeepers will always be the richest people in the room. And the question for the rest of us is whether we can see the gates in our own systems, the sorting mechanisms we've inherited, the paradigms we navigate without noticing, before they capture us completely. Somewhere in Seoul tonight, a student is sitting in a hagwon at midnight preparing for an exam whose logic was set 1,200 years ago. The frame that decides who matters was installed by someone at some point for their own reasons. And most of us never stop to ask whether we choose it for ourselves. Thank you for watching. If you want more of this, subscribe. I also write a newsletter that goes deeper into these ideas. The link is in the description. I'll see you in the next video.